James Gunn's new Superman movie has just released in theaters, but how does it rank among the others? Let's find out. What's up guys, welcome to the channel. I'm Nick, and today we are going to rank 10 theatrically released Superman films from the worst to the best, including the new James Gunn Superman. Without further ado, let's get started. In last place, Superman 4, The Quest for Peace. Now this movie wants to take a serious tone by having Superman go through nuclear missiles and trying to create peace throughout all of the chaos surrounding it, but the movie just decided to go completely cuckoo banana pants with its tone. It's 95% quirky family comedy, and then 5% actually serious, where you have Lex Luthor playing a parody of himself in a comedy film. Lex Luthor in the Reeve films is already just out there. He's not the devastating, chaotic Lex Luthor that we've seen in past interpretations, but even here, he just feels way too much mocking himself, to where the greatest criminal mastermind that he calls himself throughout the whole franchise has to steal a strand of Superman's hair from a museum display by smashing the glass box that it's in, setting off every single alarm in the museum. The visuals in this film are also at an all-time low. The budget for this film was dropped dramatically from the past Superman films in this series, and the visuals definitely show it. They have the same effect of Superman flying multiple times throughout the film, and every fight between Superman and Nuclear Man look hilariously terrible, making this at points so bad that it's good, but as a whole, this movie is no laughing matter. In ninth, Supergirl. Now, what if I told you that there is a movie that starred both Faye Dunaway and Peter O'Toole? And what if I told you that movie was Supergirl? Now, this is a smaller budget spin-off of the Christopher Reeve series, where they try to do some connections by bringing in Jimmy Olsen and having connections to Clark Kent throughout the film. But this movie just makes baffling story choices that don't create an entertaining film at all, where you spend the first hour going back and forth between Supergirl going back to school and Faye Dunaway playing an evil witch, where they don't really draw a good enough connection between the two characters until over the halfway point. So you're just watching nothingness for a lot of it and questioning why you're even there. And we don't even see much Supergirl until the back half of the film. It's mainly just Linda Lee going around at school and a couple scenes of her flying around and then having small confrontations. But for the most part, we just don't see much of her. Now, what makes it somewhat memorable in Quest for Peace for me is they do explore the Phantom Zone quite a bit in this movie, and those parts are decently entertaining. It's not great, but it's at least decent enough. And also, there's a bumper car scene that has the Pittsburgh Steelers bumper car, which is awesome and really shows the true Man of Steel, Jack Lambert. God, we are never winning a Super Bowl ever again. 9 and 8, here we go. In 8th place, Superman and the Mole Men. Now, this was originally intended to be a pilot for the 1950s Adventures with Superman TV show, and you can very much feel it here. This just became an extended theatrical cut of the pilot, which just became 2 back-to-back episodes, and it very much suffers from that, where the story is just very boring, of Clark and Lois investigating this oil plant, and these mole men decide to come in. You don't know if they're good or bad, but it's kind of leaning towards that. But it just becomes Clark Kent in a Universal Monsters kind of thing, mostly Frankenstein, where you just have these monsters. The humans are scared of them and think they're evil, so you just have an angry mob going after them, and Superman has to say, hey guys, we shouldn't really judge them. And that's a message, like, not judging is a good message for a Superman story, but the execution of this plot was really just flat and boring, making for a tedious watch even though it's under an hour long. It's at least interesting to see a part of comic book film history with this, because this was one of the very first theatrically released comic book films. And besides the serials of Batman and Superman and then other characters just like Flash Gordon and everything, those serials from the 30s and 40s were really all we had in the theater for these characters. So it's interesting enough to see this piece of history. And it does feel a little unfair to me, at least, putting this film in a ranking like this, having Superman and the Mole Men stacked up against Man of Steel, Batman v Superman, huge productions like that. But the reason it's so low for me is just the poor writing, awful pacing, and just kind of boring story and plotline they go with here. The film just feels like it comes off as something that would be on Mystery Science Theater 3000, and when I looked up to see if it was, I'm shocked that it wasn't. In 7th place, Superman 3, or as I should say, DC Presents Richard Pryor. The focus on this film is all over the place, between Superman going back to Smallville, and then Richard Pryor playing Gus Gorman, and rising through the ranks of computer tech. And throughout this film, it just doesn't do a good enough job at connecting these two plot lines for most of the runtime, where we're just going back and forth between a decently serious tone for the Superman and Smallville stuff, and then complete slapstick comedy with Richard Pryor's stuff. So the tone feels all over the place, but it doesn't fully lean into one or the other, where 1 second it's Richard Pryor doing Richard Pryor things, and then the other moment we have evil Superman, who doesn't even feel like evil Superman in this. This movie is exactly like if Jack Dougherty got superpowers and was like, yeah, I'm gonna make sure the Leaning Tower of Pisa is no longer leaning. Make sure to subscribe to my channel for more horrible things. That's exactly what this evil Superman plotline feels like, which honestly, making me think of Jack Dougherty really makes him feel evil. But the heart of the first two films is completely gone because Lois Lane is so absent in this. It felt like they didn't know how they wanted to continue the ending of Superman 2 and how to go forward with the Clark and Lois romance. So they just sideline her completely, and the emotional backbone of those first two Superman films is just gone. So at the end of the day, it just feels like a plain, messy, disjointed experience that isn't completely poorly directed and stuff, but it's just not something you would ever want to subject yourself to again. In 6th place, Superman Returns. Now, honestly, I think there is a pretty solid movie in this. Brandon Routh as Superman is honestly pretty enjoyable, and this continuation of Lex Luthor from the Gene Hackman version I thought was decent enough. And the action scenes, there are some standout parts of this, like the plane scene in Act 1 is enjoyable, and there's other moments that have that Superman heart to it, but the pacing in this film is so god-awful long. Like, there is no reason this movie had to be 2.5 hours. I think if they trimmed it down to 2, maybe a little bit under, we would have had a much better, more focused story. And it felt like the movie was having an identity crisis on whether it wanted to continue on from Superman 2 of the Reeves series, or if it wanted to just be a complete reboot and do the planned trilogy that they had until box office was so bad they had to just scrap those two. But there's moments where they're bringing things in from Superman 2, but there's other parts of this where it feels like they're just trying to do their own thing and separate itself from it, to where it's not a modern continuation in the sense that it wants to be. It just feels like something that doesn't know whether they wanted to fully lean into just being a new thing in general. And what I've noticed with Superman Returns is people are starting to come around on it, which I can understand that. I think it's watchable, it's fun enough, so I understand where all that's coming from, but for me it just didn't fully click. In 5th place, Batman vs. Superman Dawn of Justice. Now this is a very divisive film in the DC catalog, just as a whole, and this is something that I really do want to like. There's a lot of aspects of this movie that I really do enjoy and will defend it on. I think the setup of a post-Man of Steel world where no one knows how to react to Superman after all the destruction that was caused, and some people liking having a figure like Superman, and then other people like Batman who are thinking there's a lot of destruction going on. I like that idea, and I think they set that up pretty well. But around the hour mark, the film just decides to just self-implode on what it's trying to do, where one moment we have the Lex Luthor stuff, and another moment Batman and Superman are fighting each other, which I think happened too soon in this continuity anyway. And then they're trying to set up Justice League and then other parts of the DCEU. So it feels more like setup for Justice League than a continuation of Man of Steel as the film goes on. Like, there's a lot of potential in this movie, but to me it just comes off as messy. Like, the action is on another level, and a lot of that is due to Zack Snyder's vision and his style, where every moment where Superman and Batman are fighting, or the Doomsday fight, like, everything just looks fantastic and is super entertaining. And that's what you'll always get in a Zack Snyder film, except for Rebel Moon. But any Zack Snyder film, you'll expect that. But the highs get buried in very overstuffed lows, making this film more frustrating than enjoyable for me. In 4th place, Superman 2. Now, with a lot of production issues, with Richard Lester coming in to replace Richard Donner and having to have majority of the cut, you just have kind of an imbalanced tone and vision for what this movie was going to be in the original cut of it, where this one feels a lot zanier, cheesier, and bringing more of a whimsical vibe to Superman than the more grounded, mythical, epic scope of the very first one, where honestly it feels more like an episode of the Wonder Woman TV show with Linda Carter than it does continuing the exact tone of the first Christopher Reeve Superman film. When you get into the story though, I feel like Lex Luthor needed a lot more time in this, where it feels like he's kind of tacked on at the start and you're wondering where that's even going. And then General Zod, I think he's actually really cool in this. Zod and his crew are great, but I think they really needed to kind of fuse them and Luthor together a bit better and a little sooner, and just give more direction on what the idea behind Luthor being in here is. But on the good side with this, I think the dynamic of Clark and Lois is explored and expanded well, and adds a lot of the heart to this film yet again. And the inner turmoil of Clark wrestling with being Superman and being Clark, and how Lois is going to fit into his life while he balances these two versions of himself, I think that's a very interesting aspect and great way to go for a sequel. And there's a really great scene in the final battle of this film, very reminiscent of Spider-Man 2 with Tobey Maguire, where when everyone's carrying Tobey Maguire on the train and you really see the heart of the city and their love for Spider-Man. They have a moment like that towards the end where Metropolis is running towards Superman to help him out. It's like that scene walked so Spider-Man 2 could run. So I think that moment was very well earned, and there's a lot of just great action moments and another great Christopher Reeve performance as Superman. So while there are some imbalances and just wishing that we have a very true version of Donner's version that's not as rough around the edges of the Donner cut, but honestly, I still enjoy watching this movie, and I think it continues the first one well enough. In third place, we have Man of Steel. This is Zack Snyder's very divisive entry into the DC catalog, where a lot of people love this movie, a lot of people hate this movie, and a lot of people take to Twitter with this movie.
Get along!
This is one of those controversial films where I understand both sides. I very much understand the side that is very into Zack Snyder's style, and I understand the people who really don't like this interpretation of Superman, wanting a more hopeful version that we get from Christopher Reeve or James Gunn's version. So I understand both sides of this. I'm kind of in the middle, where I say yes to both sides. Like, honestly, I really do love the darker tone of this film. I like the bleak, serious, grand scale that Zack Snyder brings to it, and that leads to the emotion hitting in a lot of scenes. I know that's something that people critique this movie for, having forced in kind of corny emotion. I think it works really well. Like, towards the ending, with how Superman handles Zod, you really feel it, and I think they handle Clark's character well in this, which is something that I kind of ignored the past times I watched it, so I'm very happy I watched it again. And the action plays very comic booky in Zack Snyder's own way, where it doesn't feel like it's ripped from a Golden Age Superman comic. It feels like it's ripped out of Zack Snyder's mind with that comic book flair. So every scene is just such a grand scale. Like the Krypton intro, I think is phenomenal. I think all the Metropolis fighting and the cool weapons and power sets that everyone's got in this film, I think all of that looks really cool, and that's something we'd only get out of a Zack Snyder film. I do think it takes a little bit to get going though, where the first hour, granted it's setting up a lot of stuff, it doesn't feel like we're dragging our feet to get to where we need to be, where you don't know why it's taking this long. You know what is going on and you like it, but you're waiting a little bit to really have this movie hit. Now that being said, I really do love Henry Cavill's portrayal as Superman. This is a very different Clark Kent and very different vibe that we're getting of this character than previous interpretations. So I think Henry Cavill did well with the version of Superman he was given. Whether you like that version or not is completely up to you. But I think objectively speaking, Henry Cavill did a good job with the material Zack Snyder wrote for him. But despite some corny moments as a whole throughout this movie, I still really enjoy it. Again, I understand both sides, but this is a movie that I would go back to willingly and always have a good time with it. In second place, we have the new James Gunn Superman. I actually reviewed this a couple days ago. You guys should totally check that out and boost some views on it, because I looked at my impression click-through rate and I really need to improve that, so please save this channel from dying immediately. But this is the complete opposite end of the spectrum from Man of Steel, where if Man of Steel is on this side of the dark tone spectrum for Superman, James Gunn is over here for a very cartoony feel, very comic booky, and very just James Gunn. And this is another case where not as extreme as Zack Snyder, but if you love James Gunn, this movie is for you. If you don't, I understand reservations. This has a surplus amount of comic book zaniness, and plays out like a cinematic Saturday morning cartoon. David Cornsweet's take on Superman is actually my favorite since Christopher Reeve, with the amount of charm, heart, and soul he brings to this character. And the rest of the cast was also just done to perfection. Rachel Brosnahan as Lois Lane was phenomenal. Nicholas Hoult as Lex Luthor is my personal favorite that I've seen. And everyone else was just perfect. Nathan Fillion as Guy Gardner, incredible. So I loved the cast and everyone in this movie. And what I really love that James Gunn did with this is he really made Superman feel like the symbol of hope and the beacon for humanity that we've been craving for a bit on the big screen. So just feeling that in the theater, watching this, put a smile on my face. And the world that we're introduced to is super colorful and vibrant, and it's just so much fun to be in with everything James Gunn pulls here. Now, I do think it is a little overstuffed with a bunch of ideas where some side characters should have had a little more development, but as a whole, this movie is just so much fun to watch, and it really brings you back to why we love Superman in the first place and why he is one of, if not the biggest American IP we've ever seen. But in first place, we have Superman the movie with Christopher Reeve. This is the classic superhero adventure that started all of it. It is the most influential comic book movie ever made, in my opinion, and without it, we would not have our favorite stories on the big screen that we do today. Now, while it is a little bit dated with its visuals and just being a very 1970s film, it just shines through that, and all these years later still feels like a timeless tale of a man who is a symbol of hope for humanity. It has these insane powers and is virtually invincible, but you still see the vulnerable side of him. The visuals, to me, while a little dated in some parts of the film, I think they hold up well. The whole scene on Krypton is so much fun, and I just love the look of older visuals. I don't know if that's just a me thing, but I love campy visuals like in Beetlejuice and stuff like that. So I love watching old visuals, and this movie really does hold up in a lot of parts. And then they also bring in for the story, they bring in Mario Puzo, who wrote The Godfather, in to write the story. So you already have this long, epic story that plays out so beautifully. And then John Williams with the score, one of the most iconic superhero themes of all time, and then Richard Donner at the helm, a legendary filmmaker. Everyone they pulled together for this just made such a special experience where it may not be everyone's favorite, but it is your favorite superhero film's director's favorite superhero movie. Christopher Reeve is absolutely perfect as Clark Kent, and while David Cornsweet might catch up in the future, Christopher Reeve is still currently my favorite one. Just what he brings to this role is incredible, and just the contrast that he has for Clark Kent and Superman is so good. And we love big action set pieces. That's our favorite parts of a lot of superhero films, but I love the smaller scale parts of it that really show Superman and humanity, and Superman helping the little guy is something you love seeing in here, where I love the whole epic ending, but it's just those small moments of Superman helping everyone out and showing who he truly is. Those are the moments that truly make this film work. Everything culminates in such a fantastic, emotional, heartfelt way to where at the end of it, you just feel so hopeful inside and want to watch it again. I understand if it isn't your favorite Superman film, but to me, this one is one of the most special comic book films we have out there, and one of the most important in comic book film history. Thank you all for watching my Superman ranking. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Whether you agreed or disagreed with my list, I really hope that you guys were able to enjoy hearing my take on this. Make sure to let me know your rankings down in the comments below. And with that said, goodbye.